Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today. This is Kathy, and I am back with yet another ice cream cone card. And today's flavor is cotton candy, which was another suggestion over on Instagram. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. I started out with a piece of Canson watercolor cardstock and I treated it with my anti-static powder bag. Then I inked up the stamp with Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink. Coated it with white detail embossing powder from Hero Arts, and then heat set it with my heat tool. Next, I go right in and start the coloring, and for this card, I'm using my Arteza Real Brush markers, which I do have a coupon code in the description below for you. And the coupon code is good for any purchase on the Arteza website. There's also a link to the website in the description as well. As I usually do, I started out with my darker color and put a little bit down on the outer edges, so the darker part of the cone would be on those outer edges so that I could have a nice highlight down the center. Blended that out with a little bit of water and then added in the second color. Of course, all of the colors will pop up on the screen for you as I use them. They'll also be listed in the description below as well as over on my blog. I really do like to emboss images and then use the water brush markers because the embossing powder creates little wells, as it were, so it makes it easy to stay within the lines. And I just like the look of it because it's, as you're working on it, it's like there's nothing on that cardstock, and then as the color is added, all of a sudden it just comes to life. So anyway, back to the coloring. I'm going to whip through the cone pretty quick because I used the same colors and the same technique as I did in my last video. If you've not had a chance to see that one, I'll go ahead and link it to the end of this video. And with that, I'll go ahead and play a little bit of music for you while I finish up the cone, and then we'll move on to the ice cream. Okay, moving on to the ice cream. I did Google cotton candy ice cream so that I could find a photo reference to use while I was coloring this in. I kind of thought it was going to be difficult to color it in, but it turned out to be really easy. So what I did first was I went in with the blue brush pen and kind of just filled in areas. I kind of wanted them to go at a diagonal line because that's how it looked in the photo reference that I was looking at. And I made sure to leave some white space close to the embossed lines. And then I went in with the pink and I did the same thing. I wanted to make sure that I left some white space around the very edges near the embossed lines because in the photo reference, the ice cream looked like it was starting to melt. And as the pink and the blue were melting together, it was kind of turning into a really light purple. So I added a little bit more water and started to go over those embossed lines to draw the pink and the blue together to get that real light purple. I did heat set it a little bit so that I could go in and add another layer of color in certain areas, particularly on the outer edges of the ice cream. I wanted to make sure that it was darker on the outside, also like at the very bottom just above the cone. I do add a little bit more blue underneath the whipped cream because the whipped cream would actually cast a little bit of a shadow on the ice cream itself. And then I just kind of keep working it and blending it with more water and then adding more color if I needed to. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit more music for you, and then I'll be back to go over the whipped cream and the cherry. For the whipped cream and cherry on this card, I did the same thing as I did on my previous card. I started with a darker gray, kept the darker gray mostly on the outer edges and along the lines where the swirls would cast a shadow, brought in the light blue, blended them together a little bit, and then used a wet paintbrush to blend them really well together. And before I started coloring in the cherry, I did heat set it to make sure that I didn't have any of the red bleed down into the whipped cream from the cherry. For the cherry, I wanted to have the darker color more concentrated on the bottom of the cherry where it would be pushed down into the whipped cream, also on the left-hand side of the cherry. And I did use the dark color pretty sparingly because it is a very strong color. Then I brought in the red brush pen and added it where it would be lighter on the right-hand side, and just blended those two together with a wet paintbrush. Next up is the background, and I wanted it to be very cheery and summery, so I chose a yellow marker and just scribbled it all over the background and used a wet paintbrush to blend that color out towards the edges. After I was done with that, I decided that I wanted to have some sort of texture in the background, so I pulled out a stencil from My Favorite Things and added a little bit of white paint to my craft mat. And mistake number one was watering down that paint because it was already a fluid acrylic. So when I added the paint with the sponge, it just kind of squished right through and it ended up just being a white blob. But I'm not too willing to give up, so I try and do it again and keep working at it. And I'm still not really liking how it's turning out. So I try and dab it up with a paper towel. And then I put the stencil back on to see if I can get more of the stencil pattern to show through. And finally decided that the only way I'm going to get that stencil pattern to show through the way I want it to is to use a makeup blending brush with a yellow ink pad and go over white paint. So while I was doing the ink blending over the white paint, I was just kind of randomly picking spots. I didn't want to have the pattern all over the background, so that's why you keep seeing me move the stencil over, and then especially up in that top right hand corner where I had like way too much white paint. And by the time I was done with the ink blending, I was finally happy with the background. So to finish up the card, I adhered the watercolor panel, which measures 3 1/4 by 7, onto a piece of blue cardstock that was slightly larger. Then I adhered that to a white note card that measures 3 3/4 by 7 1/4. Next, I decided to stamp a sentiment from the Sweet Sentiment stamp set from My Favorite Things. I stamped it onto a piece of pink cardstock with Versamark ink, coated it with white embossing powder, and heat set it until it was nice and melted. Ran it through my die cut machine with a fishtail banner die and then trimmed it down to fit. I adhered that with foam tape, and to really finish it off, I decided to add some pink and blue sequins to bring out more of the pink and blue from the ice cream. And that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.